Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee Lavallee McKenna. I'm a therapist and shamanic healer, and today I'm welcoming Kelley Harrell, who I've had the great privilege of doing some personal work with. They're an author, mentor, and deathwalker, and we're going to talk about a shared passion of the process or the perspective of animism. Welcome, Kelley. So
Thank
great to
you.
have
It's
you
good to see
here.
you, Renee.
Yeah, you too. So, can you define or describe animism as you understand it?
My sort of down and dirty definition of animism is it's the perspective that everything has consciousness. And within that consciousness, we are in relationships. We're in relationships all the time, all around us. And that means that we have a lot of responsibility to each other. It means that we have agency, and how we use our agency impacts everything around us. And so, animism is a deeply responsible way of moving in the world. And I also feel like it's important to say indigenous populations and ancient cultures
Mhm.
would be animistic, but they would not have used that word. In fact, that word would be derogatory for some people to express or have their path described that way. So I feel like that's an important thing to say also. We really don't have a word that is better in sort of American settler culture.
Right. I mean, I think the term comes from the verb like animate or animation, meaning that thing to give something life, right? So everything has life. And from my perspective, the animistic perspective that all things have consciousness, all things have a life force in them, even things we consider inanimate, right?
Yeah.
Like pen and wall and um,
Yeah.
water, things that for some of us in the spiritual practices, we like it, those obviously seem animated, but for other people, that might be a stretch. And for me, what that relationality does is it provides a tremendous sense and experience of universal support.
I
That
love
I'm
that.
part of this network, like this spiritual or energetic or natural family that like breathing in and breathing out. I breathe in things that the plants and the plankton and the trees create in oxygen, and then I breathe back out carbon dioxide that they use in their system. So this interbeing that's talked about in Buddhism, and for me, the experience of the life force in all things and opening to that, even in man-made things, that this life force exists in different levels of consciousness, has given me a sense of comfort and stability and connection that's really been life transforming.
I love that. I
Mm.
love that. I look at that as interdependence and belonging. And I love that you hit on the belonging part first, the support part. Because
Mhm.
that's something that we don't foster that in American settler culture. We're very I, like as in, the main character, me, in
Mhm.
my life, and individualism. And those things fall apart with animism. There's the awareness that we are not just an individual expression of source. We are still in relationship with all things all the time. And I, like you, I find that incredibly supportive.
Well, the thing about that, and I love that you just brought this up, is I'm a student of human development, both on an individual level and on a species level. And it's interesting because each phase of our development, actually, the limitations of that or the problems that it causes calls us into the next level of wisdom development, right? And so, coming out of tribal culture where there was individualism wasn't helpful at all, right?
Yeah.
An individual couldn't succeed or survive for the most part by themselves, right? And so then, and then there's this like cycle back and forth or flipping, I think, forward between a group consciousness and individual development, and then realizing the limitations of that by those who are harmed or left out of that, and then more individual consciousness and more group development. And I really see the individuation that's really a new thing that's happened in the last, particularly the last 100 years, where like, I can own property. I can vote. I don't have to be married unless I want to. And, and I could marry my husband's brother. Even though other people might shun me, I wouldn't get stoned to death for doing that. So we have these freedoms and we can sleep with whoever we want, at least in most parts of America, regardless of their gender orientation or sexual configuration, right? Which is all that new freedom of individual expression. But there is this disconnection and a lack of awareness of others and of the larger system. And I think that those limitations push us forward into this next place, which I really am so encouraged by. Like, this is common conversation now, is concern for the disenfranchised, concern for the natural world that didn't exist 100 years ago in the way that it is now, with this responsibility that you're talking about.
I think you're right. I think that, you know, groups that have been on the receiving end of that for a long time,
Mhm.
have been able to survive because they have those animistic perspectives, that connection to nature, that support, that direct relationship support to all things.
Mhm.
But I mean, you're right. I mean, really, truly, COVID pushed a lot of awareness of just how much, you know, supremacy hurts everybody.
Mhm.
And that awareness has not been part of maybe European diaspora in this country.
Mhm.
And I love that that's part of the conversation now. So, you know, absolutely. I appreciate what you're saying.
So how do you see COVID moving us forward in this way in our awarenesses?
Well, how it could be moving us forward and what it's actually done. I mean, there was so much potential for the disabled and chronically ill community to finally be understood. Like to
Mhm.
finally, because that community got bigger. Long
Right.
COVID is a thing that those communities got bigger because of COVID. But we had so much opportunity, even with things like, you know, working from home, like really
Mhm.
basic things that were pushing our understanding of control dynamics, big brother kinds of things. You know, there was real opportunity for that to change, and it seemed like it did for a little while. But now some of that dialogue has pulled back, and there's been sort of a backlash for control to happen in terms of our close lived systems.
Mhm.
In terms of maybe the bigger systems beyond earth systems, I really think that it has promoted a huge restructuring of what we say we want, and the realization that our cosmologies hold some things that maybe are out of date, or they never served us to start with, but we didn't understand that they were in our cosmology. And for me, that means all of the change that we've asked for here is challenging. Like, we don't just get to flip a switch and wake up and that change, we're all good to go, and we are interdependent and we suddenly all feel like we belong. It takes work on our end, it takes pushing. And it also means a certain amount of restructuring in our cosmologies, meaning, like, maybe my experience has been that people make the assumption that their spirit allies know exactly what they need at any time. Like, there's this omniscience. And
Mhm.
what my experience has been is they don't always know. Their pulse is elsewhere. Their job description roots other than here, and ours roots here largely while we're in form. and we have to give them updates. We have to tell them what's happening. We have to tell them what our needs are and keep them aware of what's needed. And so I experienced some restructuring happening on their end also that I think has been driven by the things that COVID brought up. So there, I do weekly rune readings that I publish, and for several months, the tone of those has been the changes that we've asked for here mean change has to happen there also.
Mm.
And it feels really discombobulating that it's real. We don't have new normal to land on, but we're closer to feeling that when we're aware of what we're creating. That's a long answer to your question.
I love long answers to questions because they bring up more questions. So let's talk about spirit guides. It's a realm that we both travel in on a regular basis. And just to talk about that from an animistic perspective and how that works in your own life and with the people that you mentor and speak to.
That's a lot, right? That's a whole conversation in and of itself. I came through the 90s new age education of all things spiritual. It had some really good things, had some
Mhm.
really harmful things. It had some things that have had to be brought forward in new and evolving, I think, perspectives.
Mhm.
So for me, that has meant a lot of relationship to trees, like my my background. I know, right? It for me, it has always been more. I know it. Oh my gosh, me too with the tree branches. Yeah. See? Okay. For me, that's a lot of plant work. It's a lot of tree spirit work, and a lot of people automatically default to animals, which is, a lot of people have the animal relationships covered, and that's great. But I'm always seeking to expand people's cosmologies into all that is available to them, all the spirit ally help. And that can be ecosystem level,
Mhm.
it can be off planet level.
Right.
It's a
Mhm.
combination. So, the allies that I've worked with, they take front seat, they take back seat, depending on what my needs are, what's happening in my life, what's happening on the planet.
Mhm.
And that kind of shifting is appropriate. I work with a lot of people who get very worried when their cosmology starts to feel like it's going to change, when a guide gets quieter or maybe
Mhm.
steps back or goes completely radio silent. It is all okay. It is
Mhm.
all as it needs to be. And, maybe we need to learn some new things. Maybe another guide needs to come to the front. It's all on the table when it comes to spirit ally work, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, so the idea, again, and expanding out animism, many people may be aware of it from like in Taoism and other Eastern traditions, and certainly in all indigenous traditions, I think we could say, excuse me. We'll cut that out. Um, that the idea that the natural world is alive, right? And one of the first things I do with clients is to connect them with an element and everybody has kind of primary elements. We're all interacting with all of them. We all have water in every cell of our body, and we breathe the air in and out, and the life energy is like the celestials, and the rest of our physical form is like
Yeah.
very similar. It's carbon content to almost everything that's in the physical world, at least on Earth, right? But and connecting people viscerally, experientially with these elements as aspects of ancient wisdom, as aspects that we're related to, that are actually interacting and supporting us. That's one piece. I think expanding that out to the larger teaching of animism when we really drop into it. And again, particularly like this desk and the chair and the floor, the building, like there is life force flowing through that. The atoms are spinning. We all kind of agree on that, right? Who even knows? And most of it's space, and what's that energy? And whether we're aware of it or not, there is change happening on that what would it be? Like below our awareness level, if we want to say the atomic scale, everything's always in motion. Everything is in this living flow. And I think one of the really challenging things about being a human and just the way that we perceive things is this desire to freeze frame stuff, to want it to stop, to want things to be solid, to want them to be permanent, to want them to seek security in this physical world, which totally makes sense. And yet it's not what's actually happening. And so the call, the real wisdom of animism is that we can trust this birth, sustenance, death, rebirth, sustenance, death, infinite cycle of all things. That this building I live in, although it was probably, I'm in Manhattan, was built in 1931 or whatever, it isn't going to be here forever. I'm certainly not going to be here forever. And how do we find security, or how do we find grounding, or a center, maybe even is a better thing, within this ever-changing process that we don't control? Because I think dealing with change is probably, we could bring that down to that's really the pathology, one of the big pathologies for all of us, is how do we navigate the
Yes.
ever-present change? So how do you help people deal with that change, and how does animism affect that?
I This is a thing that I feel like is a conversation that got really derailed in like 90s era soul education. I call the mind, body, soul, and everything in between, the relationships holding all of that together, our inner cosmology. Not in that it's distinct from external, but just to give it a container that okay, I'm working within the sphere of all that I am in me and beyond. It was presented like soul was above mind and body repeatedly. Like
Mm-hmm.
no one would say that, but it was always like, well, you need to do spiritual healing for this physical ailment, this mental ailment, and you'll be fine. And if you're not fine, it's because you haven't done enough along the soul level. My my education, like my lived education, my experience, and what my ecosystem tells me over and over is that all of that is soul. Like it is not divisible. And as beings in form, that we are agency. Like we are living agency. We have thumbs. That puts us, just that alone puts us kind of in charge as custodians, not in charge as in control dynamic or dictator or extraction, right? Constantly consuming and extracting, but it puts us as really good custodians of this place. And so my challenge to people repeatedly, students, people that I'm doing readings for, is how to listen to body.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
am very neurodivergent and learning what that means for me all the time. But when a lot of people approach embodiment as feel the chair beneath you, you lost me. Like you've already lost me. I
Mm.
understand that and I understand how it works. But for me, it is more about letting body lead. Let body tell the truth. Body never lies. Mind lies all the time. All the
Yep.
time. It
Yep.
just it's how it tries to help us. It's how it tries to keep us safe. Heart lies here and there. Sometimes it's very, very true, and sometimes it wants something to be true that isn't. And so it's kind of got this middle territory, but body never lies. And that's the place that I feel most spirit led.
Yeah.
It's the place where I feel most comfortable exploring being present and being embodied. Because as soon as it starts becoming this like Instagram guru thing, I can't do it. Like I can't feel it, I can't do it. But as soon as I realize that my body is attached to elements, like you said, in my ecosystem, and we are all in relationship, I'm here.
Mm.
And that's the way I try to break it down and put it forward for people. So much of our soul education in the 90s was out there. It was like off planet, it was out there, and it skipped over like what for me would be Midgard in an Old Norse vernacular. It skipped what would be immediate ecosystem. And
Right.
that's where we are every
We're
day.
here.
That's
That's it.
too,
Right. No, I
too
was working with a
important.
client yesterday who was talking about ascending. And, it's like that as soon as that word, I'm like, uh-oh, here we
I
go.
know.
Because whatever happens after this body dissolves, we're moving. We're going to move. But we're supposed to be here now. This is not a design
I'm with
flaw.
you.
We are here. We're supposed to be here. We're supposed to be embodied. And I actually I'm curious because I have to say, I use the like body on the chair thing all the time with people. What is helpful for you to embody?
What am I feeling right now? And not trying to name it, not trying to analyze it, just give it space to be and breathe it through. So I have this synthesis of where am I plotting myself in space right now? Where is my body? And the sensuality of that, of literally the temperature, the season, my clothing, the elastic, and the parts of that that feel really good,
Mhm.
and what feelings come up around that, and just breathe them through, let them be. They can be really challenging feelings, they can be really affirming feelings, the whole gamut. But my challenge is just to continuously bring myself back to body as the conduit for that. I've had experiences where feeling myself in the chair works when me and the chair in relationship, and I can go there. Like I can
Mhm.
go to this is where me and the chair are the same. But that exercise of just being, I get lost in it. I lose the relationshipness of it, and I have to come back to what am I feeling? What am I
Right.
sensing? What am I feeling?
Well, and I love the way you talked about not having a narrative or a judgment about that. We have such a tendency to make things good or bad. Again, what the Buddhists might call attachment or aversion, right?
Yeah.
And to really be able to be present with this dialogue and all of the information that our body and our felt experience offer us. And to just openly
Yeah.
receive that information and to be in dialogue with it, relationship with ourselves. I mean, really, that's, I would say central to my spiritual psychology work is about healing people's relationship with themselves. And when we heal our relationship with ourselves, then exponentially, like ripples in a pond, we have better relationships with our surroundings, with our environment, with the people around us.
Mhm.
Because this is the first relationship in a lot of ways, is how we orient to ourselves. And
Absolutely.
what's actually we're receiving, that what's the information, and how, like you talked about being responsible, and how do I use my ability to respond to what arises that is just information, not necessarily something I need to be afraid of or control or manage or
Right.
even maybe do anything about.
It's true. I'm finding the more I situate into this is what animisming looks like in the everyday for me, like my version of that. I'm a writer. It's really hard, but language nerfs relationship. Like it just it doesn't have to, but English does. Like English has a very colonizing effect. Like it has a very controlling dynamic to it. And I find that even as a writer, as soon as I start giving it words, the thing goes. The thing
Right.
is like, nope, I'm out. And so I'm in my menopausal aged experience of being here, a lot of things have changed sensually, a lot of synapses have changed, and I can't come about that stuff the way that I could before. And so I have to drop the words. I have to not try to make that have meaning, not try to force a narrative, and instead pay attention to just what is there. Usually a really lovely belonging, it comes from that. A really lovely sense of interdependence comes from that. But trying to make it be words, to make it be narrative and shape it, it's not working for me anymore. And it worked for years. It worked for the majority of my young adulthood and my early writing career. So
That's
that,
a Yeah, no, that's a really beautiful maturation as a writer, particularly, right? I'm more of a talker than a writer, although I do have my own book. But for me, it really feels like the what I call the masculine and the feminine approaches. And of course, we've been way over masculinized, which is way too much in our head, way too much trying to name and concretize everything. And
yeah,
the word is not the thing. The word points to the thing. I mean, that's why the Jews didn't have a word for God, the ancient Jews, because it could not, if you could name it, then that was not it, right? And so
yeah,
this feminine learning and being expanded by and challenged by, as we all are, this growth into the feminine perspective and experience, because the feminine is relational. She's present, she's experiential, it's nonverbal, it's more this body felt rather than the mind. And for me, and I can imagine for you as a writer, it is about marrying the two, because this is how we communicate with each other. And how do I have the feminine have a good relationship with the masculine so that they can support each other rather than being in separate rooms, not having sex.
it is it is very much that, and it's also the exploration of what those become beyond those two parts, like
Mhm.
that becoming the we and becoming something that is curious and well beyond anything we imagined. I find it hard to relate in polarities of only feminine, only masculine, and where kind of like overdoing that, like you suggested, has it just locks us in, and it cuts us out of so much possibility, so much exploration beyond playful exploration, beyond who we are in relationship to those things.
Well, I think this is really culturally obvious in the amount of, just in my own personal circle, of transgender people, of people of, all variety of orientation and presentation and self-discovery that, is even beyond like the third gender or whatever,
Yeah.
that there is this marriage or interbeingness that's really being expressed. Again, we live in a wonderful time when it's possible to do that for the most part, right? Um, well, I think you have a lot to say about that, I would imagine.
Well, we've just so stripped away the fluidity of nature. And I
Mm,
mean, okay, why is nature a word? Like the fact, like again, even in English, right? We
right,
nailed it down, and nailing it down makes it out there. It makes
right.
it apart from us. And just, I mean, we could have conversations for days, and I would come back to, well, we separated from nature. That's when that started. We
Right.
separated from it. We saw ourselves as above nature. That's when that started. So much of our othering is rooted in that break from nature. I call it the broken path. And I think that's pretty apt. But is the path really broken? No, it was never broken. Our awareness of it is what was broken. And I just feel like that conversation applies in so many capacities of
Mm,
isms and othering, that when we start to realize that we are whole, that we are in relationship with everything around us, and either, like you said earlier, we are either consciously or unconsciously in relationship with everything. The light bulb is that everything has already always known that. We are the ones who have not had that as part of our awareness. And that omission from our awareness was intentional. It was not a side effect. It was
mm,
not an accident. It is an intentional severing of us from our own indigeneity, from our own nature relationships and ancestral lands, ancestral awareness. It is the lack of elders.
Hmm. So I guess I would see it again from this developmental perspective, this like really meta developmental perspective as a species. And again, I do, because we are all part of a system, I don't believe that there's any design flaws happening here.
Yes,
And
yes,
so just like child development, I mean, everything's kind of a fractal, right? So you can look down and as each thing can give us information, it's one of the things I really love about nature is how nature is such a wise teacher for our own soul development and our own, whatever you want to call it, right? So
right.
um, it is an interesting, I think my perspective is that, so just like an infant has a unified perspective, or at least that's kind of the Western psychology idea of it, that they have a more of a unified perspective. And then there's these realizations that they are separate. Mommy doesn't, meet their needs and they throw a fit or whatever. And so from a species wise, and I immediately was thinking about the Old Testament when you were talking about naming things and being separated. I think that that's actually the story of one of the teachings of the story of the Garden of Eden. Is the expulsion from Eden is actually the beginning of our consciousness on this different level, that animals and trees, except pets, human pets are kind of in a middle place.
Agreed. Yeah.
In fact, in the Law of One, the Book of Ra, they talk about the different densities. And the first density is like rocks and trees and wild animals. And then the second density is these in between, which could be like pets and maybe some people who are kind of know that they're part of nature, but they're also having their own, they're named, and there's an individualization there. And there's this individualization then in this separation experience as humans that I think is really confusing for us.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Right. And so, and the beauty of what I see happening and the seeds and the roots and the plants are sprouting in this is this next level of reconnection, that not like an infant, but that includes consciousness in exactly what we're talking about right now. Like, how do I return to that deeper, broader, wider truth, but with my consciousness intact, returning? That's what animism is really, right? Is returning with the wisdom and the mistakes of individuation and the development of human consciousness to evolve itself to this next place where I'm very excited. I think we're going there.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Because, nature didn't fall,
no,
right? I mean, there's some education there. Nature has never experienced brokenness. And that means that we haven't either. Our perspective on what relationships are available to us has been interfered with. It
yeah.
has been intruded upon.
But I think that intrusion itself, again, I know for me, I have had to learn by painful experience. That has always been my great teacher. I am at a place now where I can learn from, I can watch other people and say, I don't want to do that. But that took about 6 decades.
I
And
get
so,
that.
um, which speaks to the elder question that I really want to delve into. But it is in my life, and again, I think as a species, it is the pain points that make us aware that change is necessary because of this also human discomfort with change and impermanence. We often only make those changes when we're forced into it. And I mean, nature is also very conservative. Nature doesn't change things unless it's necessary to do it. And we're part of that, right? So we can see all of the necessary changes that are happening and people can catastrophize about it. But I think, our awareness of the environment and global warming and human rights violations, like that's all kind of new stuff on
It's
this
all,
level of
it
consciousness.
is, yeah. And I think ultimately they are all steps back toward an animistic way of being.
I would see it as
I,
steps forward.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would see it as bringing it's the idea of transcend and include. So we can bring forward the wisdom of the ancestors, the elders of the land, the indigenous people, and our own, of course, roots in all of that, and bringing it forward into this more expanded, more complex relationship with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, bringing all of the advantages that we've had. Because I've been on tribal land in sacred places where I wasn't allowed because I'm a woman. So, so I would like, there's some like, how can we grow and expand into the continued inclusion and the continued growing creative complexity that's happening. That's kind of its own force. I mean,
Yeah.
one of my favorite teachers, David Hawkins, talks about don't do anything. Like we're actually part of this thing. Like it's happening. We'll naturally end up where we're supposed to end up. We don't need to try to control. It's the desire to control and the balance between participating in a healthy way and trying to control things. I think that's another really growing edge for most of us.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And there's that, body level animal part of it that is just feeling. It's just feeling and being led by that.
So your coming book is Elder to Ancestor, and you mentioned elder. And so speak to your perspective on eldership.
Dialing that in, particularly to animism and animistic ways of being, we have not had good elders in that
No.
capacity. And I feel like I have to speak really specifically, like my lens is American settler culture. I can't speak to other parts of the world, other people's experiences in regional cultural places.
Mm-hmm.
But as this body in American settler culture, we've not had animistic eldership as the leading force. I don't mean you haven't bumped into it every now and then. You haven't had it somewhere occasionally, but it has not been the driving force through which we have grown and evolved and created relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've said that to people, in these years of like rolling this book around and getting it into words, people are like, "Yeah, my parents did so and so," and I'm like, "This is not about your parents.
Right.
This is about your parents not having had good animistic elders, and
Right.
their parents and their parents, and so on, all the way back to our own losses of indigeneity, to our own losses of sense of self and connections to the spirituality that can connect into our ecosystem in a healthy way. This is old. This is several thousand years old. And we have to actively engage our place and our bodies to be able to reclaim that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's again why the first thing I do is connect people with nature because it's the most easily accessible pathway to this deeper, larger consciousness system that is really in itself to experience that true connection, experience it, not to think about it or talk about it or
Right,
read about it, but
right.
to feel like, oh, the earth is holding me with gravity. Like the earth not just cares about me, I'm a part of it, right? The water is in every cell of my body. I'm about 50 or 60% water. And the same water cells that move through my body that I, take in and excrete eventually end up in the ocean. And it's all one system, right? To really
Right.
feel that is radically transformative for most of us. And, I think about my experience. It was visible when I went to Ireland for the first time, where I remember I saw a house and the kids were playing out front. And behind that house was another house that had no roof and no windows. It was obviously the ancestral home. And then behind that was a stone ruin, right? That was like, who knows how many generations back there. And these people lived on that property.
Right.
Right. There was a continuity. I get a chill.
Right.
There was a continuity that as Americans, we have no sense. I felt it in Russia as well. That there was a sense of like Ruski connection with the land, that there was a loyalty to Russia, that had nothing to do with politics.
Yes.
It had nothing to do even with culture. It had to do with like this ancestral, this deep sense of being Russian as coming from the Russian land. It was hard to even, of course, my Russian wasn't very good either, but like I knew as Americans, we don't have that continuity. It's been broken. It's been broken for everyone, including the indigenous people, right? Because
To
we've
some
all
degree, yes.
yeah.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And and that dredges up grief. And I feel like that, yes, you said like five things that my brain was like, pow, 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 yes, yes. But it dredges up grief that then causes us to say, well, how do I get that? Like how I feel the lack of that in my life. How do I get that? I can't just go back to Russia. I can't just plop
Right.
myself down and occupy. And
Right.
there are people there who are unbroken from that relationship to land, which means they're unbroken to rituals, whole other thing.
Right.
It means they're unbroken from this whole cosmology container of what the relationship to that land means. So then the question is, how do I get that? Oh, and how did I end up here? Maybe it wasn't so great. Maybe my ancestors did some terrible things that allowed me to get here. Or maybe terrible things happened to my ancestors that is why they were brought here. Like, it really brings up such complexity that I feel like is the challenge of our time to come to peace with, to come to some kind of relationship with where we stand, how we got here in a non-shame held way,
Mm.
and still be able to reach back to those ancestral spaces and give love and have a sense of belonging. One of the things as you were talking that came to me is, we always talk about, and everybody does this, everybody talks about animism like it's this thing in the rear view mirror. It's this, we used to be that, it's uncivilized, and now we know better. And the reality is we are all born animists.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just this experience of culture that we had back then. We are all born animists. We are born talking to the furniture. We are born having invisible friends. We're born setting a place setting for our doll and having whole conversations with trees. Why does that go away? Where does that go? That the answer to that question is in relationship with the question of how do I get back that land connected relationship that is ancestral. They are the same. And when we really start to delve into how we approach these things, how do I get back that childhood relationship? It was real. I wasn't making it
Right.
up. When I ask people, like you're saying about when you work with people, the first thing you do is bring them into nature and the elements.
Mm-hmm.
When I work with people and I ask them, what was your favorite relationship memory of childhood? It is
Mm-hmm.
rarely a human.
Right.
It is usually the neighbor's cat. It is the creek at my grandmother's house.
Yep.
That is
Yep.
not for no reason.
I just heard this kind of life-changing talk just to speak about this interconnectedness from a cellular perspective. So when a sperm and an egg create a zygote, which is the human with the or whatever form it is, right? And that begins to divide, there's a continuity of information, right? And so when the cell divides, it's actually creating I mean, almost like a clone of itself, although certainly they individuate a lot, right? And so it's actually the same cytoplasm and cell membrane that separates and separates and separates. And if we trace that back, we actually all share the same cytoplasm and cell membrane. And I mean, and I think we can keep tracing that back pre-human and pre-mammalian and back into whatever of the origin of atoms or cellular function is here, that we really are all part of the same thing. And,
Yeah.
you said, if my ancestors experienced tragedy and trauma, or if they perpetuated it, we all have all of that. There's
We
no
do.
way that we don't. Yes, it's like yes to all of the above for every human, right? And there was something about, there was a visual that went with it that I'm not going to show because I don't have it here, but that it just made so much sense to me in this true interconnectedness of all things. And of course, it's unfathomably complex now. I mean, our own bodies are much more like a city than a single orientation.
Absolutely.
I have more bacterial cells in my body than I actually do my own cells, although they're smaller, so they don't take up as much room. Like there's whole systems happening here in my digestive tract that aren't me. In whatever
Absolutely.
me even is, right? Plus all this inter
I love
being,
it. I love it.
right, of all things, that for me it just creates this sense of, again, connection and safety. And I don't I don't need to be afraid. This is beyond my comprehension, but I can connect with that right now. And for me,
Absolutely.
that is the answer to that. Like, how do I connect with it? We can only actually connect with it right now, right?
Yeah.
In whether it's on a city street or walking down your stairs or in a park, or sitting wherever in relationship with other humans or dogs or nature, I love it how that idea that it's, even the wording of it makes it separate, whereas everything is
Yeah.
nature, including us. Yeah.
It's challenging. It's challenging to deconstruct because then you catch your languaging as you go through the day. You catch, oh well, I said that, but I don't really experience that. That's not the way it really works for me. And then increases in these concepts of, do I really believe XYZ? I practice this, but I catch myself not really treating my food like it's sacred, like you
Mhm.
find it in all of these life areas. It really challenges you to pay attention, to walk your walk.
But I think that is, again, I love that idea, and I feel like we're doing that right now, right? Is in challenging our language to grow
Yes.
into something that's more accurate, more wise, more of a true perspective. And that challenge is the challenge of growth, right? And growth is always challenging. I heard this wonderful thing the other day. It said, if you're not doing anything, or if you're 100% successful in everything you're doing, you're not challenging yourself enough.
I hear that. Yeah.
So, Kelley, so great to talk to you. You have your new book, Elder to Ancestor, coming out June 2024, and many books, but the Runic Book of Days is really interesting for me. And I would love to have a secondary conversation
I would
to
love it.
teach people about runes.
I would love it.
Any final words for people about animism?
I think I think my final words are to realize that the support is there. The support is everywhere. It is plentiful for all of us to be the elders that we're called to be. And nobody can define that for you. Nobody knows what that is, but each of us, and the support is plentiful for each of us to be the elder that we're called to be.
Beautiful. Kelley, thank you so much and blessings on all you do and bring into the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Renee. It's great to talk with you.
You too, dear.